believe in fairies, I'm fine with it. If you believe in aliens, I'm fine with it. If you believe in one but not the other though, I think you might be missing a point. And that's what this video is going to be about. How aliens and fairies are so incredibly similar that maybe, just maybe, they are the same thing. Both aliens and fairies are known for their abduction stories. Aliens to their spacecraft, or maybe even sometimes to their planet, and fairies to the Fae realm, or the fairyland. But that hasn't really been defined properly either. Both of these types of stories are so unspecific, it's not really clear whether going off to their spacecraft or going off to the fairyland even happens. It's more just abduction. And we talk about abduction as if it's like this thing that happens to people without really explaining where they go. Oftentimes there's no real detail. Sometimes it's filled in, sometimes it isn't, but generally it's just abduction. They get taken out of wherever they are at the moment. And that might mean out of reality itself, out of the dimension, or out of space, out of physical place that they're in. Either way, both have abduction stories, and I think that's the key. When these abductions do happen, time passes differently, both for aliens and for fairies. Being taken out of time is a common thread through all of these abduction stories. During these encounters, minutes feel like hours, or vice versa. Time moves very, very differently. Could that be because of gravity, or dimensions, or a bending of space-time, i.e. aliens? Or could it be moving dimensions, i.e. fairies? Or are they the same thing? Now, depending on who you talk to, aliens and fairies can also have fairly small body proportions. So generally, grey aliens tend to be less than about 4 foot tall, so they say little green men. Well, little green men in a Victorian time would be talking about fairies. It's not until the 1950s that little green men could mean people coming from Mars. And so just because the zeitgeist changes doesn't necessarily mean that the thing that's happening to people changes. Fairy abduction reports date back centuries, but now that we've got the technology to travel to the moon and sometimes beyond, that's when our consciousness starts to expand to other options like different planets. And that's when the zeitgeist moves to, if someone's being abducted, it must be aliens. But we don't know whether it is, or whether it's just the fairies. Both aliens and fairies are mysterious and come from other worlds and are unknowable, and it's really difficult to be able to communicate with these creatures. When you do communicate with them, it's often on a different plane, or through a different altered consciousness. Whether it's telepathy with aliens or psychic links with fairies, they're essentially synonyms for the same thing. They often communicate in incomprehensible languages, whether that be telepathy or just clicks and pops, very strange sort of yabbering sounds. Both happen for both aliens and for fairies. Both have dark eyes and almost look slightly insect-like, maybe even reptilian. There's this connection with nature. They often have green skin. Sprites, satyrs and fairies all have the similar sort of look to the typical grey alien. And although we call them grey, sometimes their skin's green. Sightings typically occur in fairly remote areas, or liminal spaces. Places like forests or moors, or lonely country roads. Somewhere out of the big city, somewhere a bit more secluded and a bit more natural. They're frequently seen at night or in unusual lighting conditions. Now, some skeptics might say that that's because of the way that the light refracts and reflects and bounces off the lens in your eye even, but maybe there's something more to it. Certainly aliens and fairies both appear at dusk. They also both appear at dawn, but do you know when they tend not to appear? Midday. For both of them though, their appearance is often preceded by strange lights or strange sounds. Again, the skeptics might say, well, this is because of electromagnetism interfering with the prefrontal cortex, and particularly the visual part of the brain at the back of the brain here. It's hard to discount that skeptical theory entirely. But what is difficult to discount is the commonality between fairies and aliens in this particular context. Both aliens and fairies have the ability to appear and disappear at will, and you can see them out of the corner of your eye, but if you look directly at them, they disappear. During encounters with both fairies and aliens, people report that they are paralysed. Now, a skeptic will tell you that this is often due to sleep paralysis, which is definitely a physical thing where the body shuts off its muscle function so that it prevents you from rolling out of bed and hurting yourself while you're asleep. That's definitely a good theory. But when it comes to things like fairy abductions and alien abductions when you're not asleep, that's when paralysis still forms part of that story. And so it may not necessarily be the sleep paralysis, but there is definitely a link between aliens and fairies again. Encounters with both fairies and aliens often involves someone stepping out of time and some memory loss too. Now some people say that that's because the aliens are doing experiments and they want to make sure that trauma to that human is minimized, and so they wipe their memory. Similarly, fairies often take away people's memories for various different reasons, because maybe it's a different magical world or whatever. Either way, when you have an experience with either a fairy or an alien, they both seem to wipe your memory and time moves differently. Again, I'm not saying that one thing is true or the other thing is true, or even both of them are or are not true, but there are definitely similarities there. This is where the links become even stranger, because both fairies and aliens have a real interest in human reproduction, particularly babies. Both fairies and aliens have been known to do something called baby swapping. Now in fairy world, you've got changelings where they swap the baby out for a fairy, almost like a cuckoo in the nest. Now that fairy then grows up and often has magical powers that will manifest a bit later on. Sometimes you have hybrids where the fairies breed with the humans, but you certainly have that with aliens as well. And you also have the changeling idea, although we don't call it that, with aliens, where human babies are replaced with alien babies. If you want to hear about the star seeds and stuff, I could do an episode on that. Witnesses often describe lights, and fairy lights in particular, but when they do, they will feel a floating sensation. And this is for both alien and for fairy encounters. Now whether it's those lights or something else, both seem to leave physical marks on the human beings that they take. So aliens will often leave prick marks or scorch marks or branding on the human beings. Similarly, fairies will often leave like a fairy mark, almost like they've been fey touched. Now with both aliens and fairies, a lot of people believe that they are trans-dimensional beings, i.e. not of this three-dimensional world that we live in, but rather extra to it. And that's both for fairies and for aliens. Aliens come down in their craft, fairies come down using fairy rings or some other sort of nature form. Both fairies and aliens have a disliking for iron. Now whether that's because they just don't like it from a mystical, magical point of view, from a fairy point of view, or whether it's interfering magnetically with the alien craft, both of them really don't like iron. And that coincidence alone is really very specific, I think. For both aliens and for fairies, those people who have those interactions with them or communications with them, or even just being abducted by them, are often said to change quite physically or mentally into a better version of themselves. It might be a spiritual or psychic awakening, something that they can attribute to their experience has changed them fundamentally into a totally different and better person. Now descriptions vary wildly, but if we're going to follow the archetypical description of either a fairy or an alien, often they have green skin, often quite pale or sallow, dark eyes, often large and disproportionate to their head. They might also glow, and they certainly will have an eerie presence. Both have been linked both to ancient folklore and to modern times. And finally, if you try to capture either an alien or a fairy, or even study it, both have been associated with lost documentation, with the government, and with conspiracy theory. So what do you think? I would love to hear your opinion down in the comments. And if you did like this video, please click that like button, subscribe, ding that bell, all of that sort of stuff really helps out this channel. If you want to see this video before everybody else, have a look down in the description where you can become a member for only £1.99 per month. If you want to find out all about how to summon fairies, you might want to create a sigil. So have a look at this video. I'm going to be back next time with some more magical awesomeness, but until next time, as always,
stay magical.